Well, thank you, Mr. President. As you said, it has been a historic year at the Department of War. Recruiting and retention over this year are at the most historic levels our country has ever seen. When I had a chance to be on an aircraft carrier destroyer over Thanksgiving, the spirit in our ranks since the election under President Trump is unprecedented. I've never seen anything like it as a soldier myself in uniform, and I know a lot of you feel the same way. We've ripped out the DEI and the political correctness. It's all merit-based at the department. We're getting back to basics: accountability, training, readiness, lethality, and that's reviving that spirit. And Mr. President, we're rebuilding the military, historic investments. I just took briefings on the Golden Dome and F-47, next generation capabilities that are going to make sure that for generations to come, America has the most powerful, most capable, most lethal military in the world, which you have rebuilt once and we're rebuilding again. And then we're reestablishing deterrence and credibility. If you look at what happened, we deal with every...
All right. I need everyone to pay very close attention to what I'm about to tell you, because what's happening right now in Washington is absolutely insane. President Trump just called an emergency cabinet meeting, the first one since that brutal 43-day government shutdown finally ended. And the reason for this meeting is not the economy, it's not immigration, it's not any of the usual stuff you'd expect. No, this emergency meeting is happening because Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is in serious trouble. And I mean serious trouble. We're talking about a military strike that killed survivors, people who were already hit once floating in the water and then got hit again on purpose. And Hegseth authorized it. Are you kidding me right now? But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us. Be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
And putting narco-terrorists at the bottom of the ocean because they've been poisoning the American people. And Joe Biden tried to approach it with kid gloves and allowed them to come across the border. Cartels take over community, 20 million people, hundreds of thousands of Americans poisoned. And President Trump said, no, we're taking the gloves off. We're taking the fight to these designated terror organizations. And it's exactly what we're doing. So we're stopping the drugs, we're striking the boats, we're defeating narco-terrorists, and we're standing...
And you may say one thing, that drugs coming in through the sea by sea are down 91%. And I don't know who the 9% is.
I'm not sure either, sir.
But down 91% by sea.
We've had a bit of a pause because it's hard to find boats to...
Let me break this down for you because the details here are absolutely wild. Back in September, we're talking just a few months ago, there was a Venezuelan drug boat in the Caribbean. The military hit it with a missile strike. Standard stuff when you're going after drug traffickers, right? But here's where it gets crazy. After that first strike, after the boat was already destroyed, there were survivors in the water, people who were still alive. And instead of capturing them, instead of bringing them in for questioning, instead of doing literally anything else, Hegseth authorized a second strike, a second missile strike, to kill the survivors. Think about that for a second. These people were already floating in the water after their boat got blown up, and the order came down to hit them again, to make sure they were dead. This is what we're dealing with right now. And now Republicans are losing their minds. I'm not talking about Democrats here, although yeah, they're obviously furious too. I'm talking about Republicans. Members of Trump's own party are demanding emergency action. They want answers. They want accountability. They want to know how in the world something like this was authorized and who exactly knew about it. Because this isn't just some minor controversy that's going to blow over in a news cycle or two. This is a sitting defense secretary authorizing the killing of survivors after a military strike. This is the kind of thing that ends careers. This is the kind of thing that leads to investigations and hearings and people going to prison. And it's happening right now in Trump's cabinet during his second term. The timing of all this could not be worse for the administration. Remember, this cabinet meeting is the first one since that government shutdown ended. We're talking about a 43-day shutdown that most Americans blamed on Republicans, according to every poll that came out during that period. The GOP already took a beating in the November elections. Democrats picked up seats. Republican strategists are panicking about the midterms coming up. And now, right when they need to be focused on getting their act together and winning back public support, this Hegseth controversy explodes. It's like the universe is conspiring to make everything as difficult as possible for this administration right now. And here's what really gets me about this whole situation. Hegseth gave the order through Admiral Frank Bradley. So there's a paper trail here. There are people who received these orders and carried them out. There are military personnel who were involved in executing a second strike on survivors. This isn't some he said, she said situation where everyone can just deny everything and hope it goes away. There are records, there are communications, there are witnesses, and now Congress wants to see all of it. Both parties want answers, and they want them now, not 6 months from now, after everyone's had time to get their story straight. The bipartisan criticism on this has been remarkable to watch. You've got Democrats obviously calling for Hegseth to resign or be fired, but you've also got Republicans, members of Trump's own party, who are saying this crossed the line. Because here's the thing, there are rules of engagement. There are laws about how you conduct military operations. There are international standards about the treatment of people who are no longer combatants, and authorizing a second strike specifically to kill survivors that potentially violates all of it. This isn't about politics anymore. This is about whether the Defense Secretary of the United States ordered what might legally be considered a war crime. That's the level we're operating at here. So what happens next? That's the big question everyone's asking right now. Trump called this emergency cabinet meeting, but what's he going to do? Is he going to stand by Hegseth? Is he going to throw him under the bus? Is he going to try to spin this as some kind of tough on drugs success story and hope everyone forgets about the whole killing survivors part? We're going to break all of this down. We're going to look at what happened, why it matters, and what it means for Trump's administration going forward, because this story is not going away. This story is just getting started, and the fallout could reshape everything we thought we knew about how this second term was going to go. Stick around. All right, let's really get into the details here, because I think a lot of people are going to hear about this story and not fully understand just how serious it is. They're going to hear, oh, there was a military strike on a drug boat. Big deal. That happens all the time. And yeah, strikes on drug trafficking operations do happen. That's part of the war on drugs. That's part of protecting American interests in the Caribbean and Central America. But that's not what this controversy is about. This controversy is about what happened after the initial strike. This is about a deliberate decision made at the highest levels of the Defense Department to kill people who are already incapacitated. And that changes everything about how we need to understand this situation. So let's walk through what we know happened back in September. There was intelligence about a Venezuelan drug boat operating in Caribbean waters. The decision was made to conduct a missile strike on that vessel. That strike was carried out and the boat was destroyed. So far, this is all pretty standard military counter-narcotics operations. We've been doing this kind of thing for decades. The military identifies drug trafficking vessels, they engage them, and they neutralize the threat. That's the playbook. That's how it works. But what happened next is where everything went sideways, because after that initial strike, there were survivors. There were people in the water who had survived the attack on their boat, and at that point, the normal procedure would be to either rescue them for interrogation and prosecution, or at minimum, leave them alone because they're no longer a threat. A person floating in the water after their boat was just destroyed is not exactly in a position to traffic drugs anymore. The threat was neutralized, the mission was accomplished, but that's not what happened here. What happened here, according to the reports coming out, is that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth authorized a second strike specifically targeting the survivors. Think about that for a moment. Really sit with that. Someone looked at the situation, saw that there were people still alive in the water, and made a conscious decision to kill them, not capture them, not leave them, kill them. And that order came from the top. That order came from the Defense Secretary of the United States, through Admiral Frank Bradley, through the chain of command. This wasn't some rogue operator making a split-second decision in the heat of battle. This was a deliberate, calculated, authorized strike on people who pose no immediate threat. And that's why Republicans are freaking out right now. Because here's the thing that I don't think people fully appreciate. There are laws about this stuff. There are international conventions. There are rules of engagement that the United States military is supposed to follow. And one of the most fundamental principles is that you don't kill people who are hors de combat, which is a fancy legal term for people who are no longer capable of fighting. Survivors floating in the water after their boat was destroyed are pretty much the textbook definition of hors de combat. They can't fight back. They can't escape. They can't do anything except float there and wait for rescue or death. And intentionally killing people in that situation, that's not just controversial. That's potentially a war crime under international law. That's the kind of thing that gets countries hauled before international tribunals. That's the kind of thing that destroys America's moral standing in the world. And this is why the bipartisan backlash has been so intense. Because Republicans understand, even if they don't want to admit it publicly, that this is indefensible. You cannot spin killing survivors as some kind of tough on crime victory. You cannot go on cable news and say, well, actually, it's fine to authorize second strikes on incapacitated people because they were drug traffickers. That argument doesn't work, that argument makes you sound like a monster. And Republicans who are already worried about the midterms, already dealing with the fallout from a 43-day government shutdown that the public blamed them for, are looking at this Hegseth situation and realizing it could sink them. It could be the thing that turns a bad election cycle into a catastrophic one. Now let's talk about the shutdown for a second, because the timing here matters a lot. This cabinet meeting that Trump just called is the first one since that government shutdown ended on November 12th. We're talking about a shutdown that lasted 43 days. 43 days of government workers not getting paid. 43 days of services being disrupted. 43 days of chaos and uncertainty. And why did it happen? It happened because of a fight over ACA subsidies, Obamacare subsidies that helped millions of Americans afford their health insurance. Republicans wanted to cut those subsidies. Democrats refused to go along with it, and the government shut down while they fought about it. And when the polls came out, guess who the American people blamed? They blamed Republicans. By significant margins. The GOP took a political beating over that shutdown. And then just to make things worse, the November elections happened, and Democrats picked up seats. So you've got a Republican Party that's already wounded, already dealing with bad poll numbers, already worried about what's going to happen in the midterms. And now on top of all that, they've got a defense secretary who authorized killing survivors of a military strike. It's like pouring gasoline on a fire. It's like everything that could possibly go wrong is going wrong at the same time. And you can see why Republicans are demanding emergency action. They're not doing it because they suddenly developed a conscience about military ethics, although maybe some of them did. They're doing it because they understand that if they don't get out in front of this thing, if they don't distance themselves from Hegseth, they're going to get destroyed at the ballot box. Voters are going to look at this and say, these are the people who authorized killing survivors and then tried to cover it up. These are the people who think the rules don't apply to them, and they're going to vote accordingly. The CNN reporting on this has been particularly interesting. They're connecting the Hegseth controversy to the broader healthcare affordability battle that's been raging in Washington. Because remember, the shutdown was about ACA subsidies, and now premiums are going up. People are losing their coverage. The healthcare system is in chaos, and instead of focusing on fixing that, instead of focusing on the kitchen table issues that actually affect people's lives, the administration is dealing with a scandal about their defense secretary potentially committing war crimes. It's a complete distraction from everything they should be doing. It's a self-inflicted wound that nobody needed, and it's happening at the worst possible time. And let's talk about what this means for Trump personally. Because Hegseth was Trump's pick, Trump chose him to be defense secretary. Trump put him in that position. Trump gave him the authority to make these kinds of decisions. So when Hegseth authorizes something this controversial, this potentially illegal, it reflects on Trump. It raises questions about Trump's judgment. It raises questions about whether Trump knew about this strike and approved it. Did Trump know that Hegseth was going to authorize killing survivors? Did he sign off on it? Was this discussed at the White House level? These are the questions that investigators are going to be asking. These are the questions that Congress is going to want answered. And depending on what those answers are, this could become an even bigger problem for the administration than it already is. The parallels to past controversies are hard to ignore here. Remember the Soleimani strike back in 2020? That was controversial too, killing a top Iranian general with a drone strike. But at least there was an argument that Soleimani was an active threat, that he was planning attacks on Americans, that taking him out was a defensive measure. You could agree or disagree with that reasoning, but the reasoning existed. There was a strategic logic to it. But what's the strategic logic for killing survivors of a drug boat strike? What threat did those people in the water pose? What was gained by making sure they were dead instead of capturing them? There's no good answer to those questions. There's no strategic logic that makes this make sense. It just looks like killing for the sake of killing. And that's a much harder thing to defend. All right, let's break this down into the key points, because there's a lot happening here, and I want to make sure everyone understands exactly what's at stake, why this matters, and what's likely to happen next. This is the kind of story that has layers, and if you don't understand all the layers, you're going to miss why this is such a big deal. So let's get into it and lay out exactly what we're dealing with here. Point number 1, and this is the central fact that everything else flows from. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth authorized the second missile strike specifically to kill survivors of an initial strike on a Venezuelan drug boat. This happened back in September. The first strike destroyed the boat, and it happened on orders from the highest levels of the Defense Department. Point number 2, Republicans are in full panic mode over this. And I want to be clear, when I say Republicans are demanding emergency action, I'm not just talking about 1 or 2 people issuing statements. I'm talking about a significant faction within the party that understands how damaging this could be. They're already dealing with the fallout from a 43-day government shutdown that the public blamed them for. They already lost seats in the November elections. They already have terrible poll numbers heading into the midterms. And now they've got a defense secretary who potentially committed a war crime. The political calculation here is simple. If Republicans don't distance themselves from Hegseth, if they don't demand accountability, they're going to own this. Every Democratic attack ad from now until the midterms is going to feature this story. Every debate is going to include questions about why Republicans defended killing survivors. The political damage could be catastrophic. And that's why you're seeing this unusual bipartisan pressure for action. Point number 3, the timing of all this is absolutely brutal for the administration. Trump just called his first cabinet meeting since the shutdown ended. This should have been a reset moment. This should have been an opportunity to move past the chaos of the past few months and refocus on the agenda. Instead, the entire meeting is being overshadowed by the Hegseth controversy. Nobody's talking about policy. Nobody's talking about the economy or immigration or any of the issues that Trump wants to be talking about. Everyone's talking about whether the defense secretary should be fired or prosecuted. Everyone's asking what Trump knew and when he knew it. The administration has completely lost control of the narrative. And when you lose control of the narrative in Washington, you lose everything. You spend all your time playing defense instead of advancing your agenda. You spend all your energy trying to contain scandals instead of governing. And that's exactly where Trump is right now. Point number 4, the legal implications here are genuinely serious. This isn't just a political scandal that's going to blow over after some angry tweets and cable news segments. Authorizing a strike specifically to kill survivors could potentially constitute a violation of international law. The United States is a signatory to the Geneva Conventions. We're supposed to follow rules of engagement that prohibit killing people who are hors de combat, people who are no longer capable of fighting. Survivors floating in the water after their boat was destroyed are pretty clearly in that category. And if it's determined that Hegseth violated those rules, if it's determined that he ordered what amounts to an extrajudicial execution of incapacitated people, the consequences could extend far beyond just losing his job. There could be criminal referrals. There could be international complaints. There could be legal proceedings that drag on for years. This is not the kind of thing that just goes away. Point number 5, the broader context of healthcare affordability is getting lost in all of this chaos. Remember, the government shutdown was about ACA subsidies. Republicans wanted to cut them. The fight over that shut down the government for 43 days. And now with premiums rising and people losing coverage, that issue is more urgent than ever. Millions of Americans are struggling to afford their health insurance. Millions more are worried about what's going to happen to their coverage. This should be the top priority for the administration. This should be what they're focused on fixing. Instead, they're dealing with a scandal about killing survivors of a boat strike. The healthcare crisis is getting worse while Washington is distracted by self-inflicted wounds. And the people who suffer are ordinary Americans who just want to be able to afford to go to the doctor. It's a failure of governance at the most basic level. So what happens next? Well, there are a few possible paths forward here. Path 1, Trump stands by Hegseth and tries to ride this out. He defends the strike as tough on drugs. He attacks the critics as weak on crime. He makes this a partisan fight and hopes his base sticks with him. That's the combative approach, and it's very much in character for Trump. But the risk is that it alienates the Republicans who are already worried about the midterms. It makes the party look complicit in what happened, and it gives Democrats endless ammunition for attack ads. Path 2, Trump throws Hegseth under the bus. He distances himself from the decision. He accepts Hegseth's resignation or fires him outright. He frames it as holding people accountable when they cross the line. That approach limits the political damage, but it also makes Trump look like he wasn't in control of his own Defense Department, and it raises questions about what else is happening that Trump doesn't know about. Path 3, and this is the messiest option, is that this drags out for months. Congressional investigations, hearings, subpoenas for documents and testimony, slow drip of new revelations that keep the story in the news. That's the worst case scenario for the administration because it means they never get to move past this. It means every week there's some new development that reminds voters about the controversy. It means the midterms become a referendum on whether Republicans can be trusted with power. And given everything else that's happened, the shutdown, the election losses, the poll numbers, that's a referendum Republicans really don't want to have. The bottom line is this. Trump's administration is facing a genuine crisis, not a manufactured controversy, not a partisan attack, a real crisis caused by decisions made at the highest levels of the Defense Department, decisions that potentially violated international law, decisions that killed people who were already incapacitated and posed no threat. And how Trump handles this crisis, whether he shows leadership and accountability or whether he doubles down and makes it worse, is going to shape everything that comes next. This is a defining moment. This is the kind of situation that separates leaders from pretenders. And right now, with Republicans demanding emergency action, with bipartisan criticism mounting, with legal experts questioning whether war crimes were committed, Trump has to make a choice. Stand by his defense secretary and own whatever comes next, or cut him loose and try to move on. There's no easy option here. There's no way to make this just disappear. The only question is how much damage gets done and to whom before this is all over. All right, that's the breakdown. That's everything you need to know about the Hay-Gen-Bow strike controversy and why it's throwing Trump's cabinet into crisis mode. This story is developing fast. There are going to be more revelations, more demands for accountability, more political maneuvering as everyone tries to position themselves for whatever comes next. And we'll be here covering all of it. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss anything. Hit that notification bell. Share this video with people who need to understand what's really happening in Washington right now, because this story is going to matter. It's going to have consequences, and you're going to want to know what happens next. This is far from over.